My guest at this time is Christopher C. Horner. He is a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He joins me today to discuss the emerging details of the Green New Deal, first proposed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and now endorsed by a number of Democratic presidential candidates. There are some pretty eye-opening ideas in here, and we definitely want Chris's reaction to them specifically and get his ideas on where he thinks this debate is going. And Chris, thanks so much for your time today.
You bet, Greg. Thank you.
Well, it's ambitious, to say the least. This is the left's idea of basically ending fossil fuels, saying they will be unnecessary by the year 2030. They're basing all of this off of a recent government report that we're at a tipping point on climate change that will occur by then. So basically a decade to go. They want a free guaranteed job to everyone. They want guaranteed government-provided health care to everyone. They think that this new approach with green energy is going to render air travel unnecessary within a decade and so forth. We'll get into some of the details as we go here, but in general, what's your overall reaction to this?
I think it presents a very strong case against publishing first drafts. I don't know if any Hawaii members are on board with ensuring they get to Washington by rail, but that would be lit. I look forward to the transatlantic routes. There's some real tells in here. It's not about the climate. There's no assertion what the temperature would be or that the temperature would be any lower, which it's in the name of that, as you know. It's in the name of climate change. But there's something immoral about legislating, imposing policies in the name of averting a catastrophe that you don't claim, and actually no one claims, would actually impact the alleged looming catastrophe. There's no claim that this actually has a climate impact. And you can see one of these tells is after the first finding about the imperative, it goes from clean air, clean water, okay, which isn't really the issue here. We actually have laws for that. It moves on to guaranteed national income for anybody who is not unable or unwilling to work.
Right.
A lot of social engineering, social justice. It gets into indigenous peoples and oppression and so on. And so it slips the rails fairly quickly. This is, as I've said before, just a vehicle. The issue isn't the issue. It's not about climate. Climate is what has captured this particular generation that the author is from. And I understand she has some co-sponsors. They are individuals who are politically climbing for another position. But if you look at, for example, the Washington Post coverage, the week after the election, it reports about a meeting that some somewhat more seasoned members of Congress had with the incoming Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, pleading with her to make sure she avoids subjecting them to any votes like the 2009 cap-and-trade vote, which they, despite public denials, plainly know cost them their majority. So this is a gesture. It has in its rationale in the frequently asked questions they posted today, the first item was it would provide a massive investments to businesses and other organizations who participate. So Ms. Cortez may be new to town, but she's figured it out pretty quickly. So it's not like it won't get a lot of discussion. And it is likely the case that a non-binding resolution will pass the House. In terms of actual legislation, which she suggested she's going to break up into constituent parts, I don't see that happening except for just more spending on what we're going to call infrastructure.
One of the things this blueprint for the Green New Deal points out, Chris, is that from their perspective, there won't be much of a need for carbon capture or cap and trade and that sort of thing. She believes that this revolution in our economy for renewable energies will be the rising tide that lifts all boats, and so it's really not even all that critical to figure out how we pay for it because it's going to be this new renaissance. Obviously, right. There's been efforts to work with renewables before. Is there any evidence to suggest that this could be the underpinning of our economy?
I don't see why not, right? I mean, wind is just a technology commercialized in the 80s, 1887 to be precise. Solar was 1891, so they're really infant technologies, as they say, living in their parents' basement for over a century, us being the parents. I don't think that a government program is going to finally defeat the laws of physics. The laws of politics will likely apply to this. My first reaction, and the joking one, is why didn't someone think of this before? Because There is a video. Institute for Energy Research has posted a video excerpting State of the Union speeches from Nixon through George W. Bush, through President Obama, where they all claim that they would be the ones to run the economy on flubber, pixie dust, or, in George W. Bush's case, weeds. It's aspirational and endearingly optimistic, but no.
Yeah, switchgrass, I believe, was what George W. Bush
Yes.
was promising to work on.
And I'm still waiting for that. I'm long in switchgrass.
Well, let's talk about the way to respond to this, because obviously you're having fun with this. Other people are having fun with this that disagree with this aggressive, progressive agenda. But sometimes what gets laughed at one point in time ultimately becomes a more serious agenda later on down the road. So what's the right way to confront it from your perspective?
Right. And that is a legitimate, in fact, urgent concern. I say this because this week there were two models on display in two committees of the House of Representatives. There was the all-powerful Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction for these issues, and the Republicans there put on a shameless display of toadying toward this lobby, saying there is not a ray of sunlight between us and you. We just disagree on the approach. All right, well, that is not the winner here. I don't know whether they actually believe this or they just are tired of defending the noise machine at town halls. The other approach was reflected in the House Natural Resources Committee, where people pressed back and pointed out what the Republicans pointed out when they successfully fought this in 2009 and 10, which reminds us, there's a model for this. They did do this before, and it led to spectacular scandals, as massive transfers of taxpayer wealth do, and it led to a political collapse for the people pushing it. It does kill jobs, the people who vote for it. So the Republicans should remember how they successfully dealt with this last time around. Many of them were here. Ms. Cortez may not have been really attentive to politics and policy at the time. People actually did run through this, and their experience with that ought to be tapped. They pointed out that it's a tax, and I'm sure that the proponents of this Green New Deal will avoid that at all costs, but they should point out, you say this is mobilizing on a war footing, and because it's the greatest threat facing mankind, except for apparently nuclear power, which this will not allow, right. Dams. So this is the greatest threat facing mankind other than nuclear power, dams, windmills anywhere Kennedys and Kerrys can see them. What's next? Carbon capture and sequestration. There are a lot of threats greater than this greatest threat, because Ms. Cortez is outlining that we will not go this particular route, even though we only have 10 years left. There is a lot of running room here for politicians who inherently do not want to get into the details and even don't want to fight the scientific alarmism or the alarmism on the scientific claims. And they ran it successfully before. People do not wish. Everybody is for this at the cocktail party level, but they are not willing to pay $10 a month. Even a recent poll just showed that. Because in the end, just like the individuals who claim this don't live a life that suggests they really believe it, people don't vote the way they respond to opinion polls on this. Yes, they want to do anything in the name of catastrophic man-made global warming except pay a fraction of what's being demanded of them.
Well, even the socialists in France rebelled against those types of taxes. We saw that in recent months. But based on what you just said about how the Republicans acted in the House Energy and Commerce Committee this week, it appears that the Democrats may have scored a small victory here, because if the Republicans are moving a little bit left, or maybe even a little bit more than that left, and Democrats, or at least some of them, are moving way left, the center of this debate then shifts further left as well. And so what will ultimately seem reasonable at one point is, well, we're not going as far left as this Green New Deal, so it's somehow a win for those who are opposed to it.
Right. We all agree that we must do something, and then we'll agree on what something is. And that's what got us into all sorts of problems that really teed up the Obama scandals, where with the funding and so on, they were just expanding a mindset and a series of programs that existed for the most part. It is a very slippery slope. It's dangerous to make policy this way, and that was a very insightful comment. They have just, in the relevant committee, moved this left. Will the Republicans behave so cravenly on the special climate committee is a legitimate question. If they put carbon taxers, these guys who don't want to be yelled at, who don't want to fight on this, they just want to say me too, but just not as extreme as this person, which fails every time. You know, the Republican members of the House Climate Caucus got wiped out in this last election because people will go for the real thing. If you say, yeah, I believe we're all killing the planet, but I just don't want to spend as much, that's how people vote, but that's not what they're looking for in political leadership or representation.
Last topic here, Chris, and you mentioned it there in passing, and I want to get your insights on it because it's been floated by the likes of Jeff Flake just a couple days before he left office and some others on the right, this carbon tax that they claim would be neutral, ultimately. Exactly what would it do, who would pay it, and how would it allegedly be neutral or not?
It wouldn't, because, A, you're talking about funding a massive bureaucracy to serve as the middleman, taking it out of, arguably, they say, well, we'll just take it out of your right pocket and put it back in your left pocket. Details to follow. And so you'll just change your behavior because it'll be more expensive at the pump, then you'll get a big check. The problem is, obviously, you're paying for a bureaucracy which doesn't come cheap. As you know, the federal employees have done quite well compared to the private sector. And you're also talking about when it comes down to it, thieves fall out when it comes time to split up the loot, like in all the old westerns. And you've seen these ballot initiatives fail in, like, Washington State, when the Greens said, wait a minute, you're not going to redistribute the money to us, then don't do it. And there are a lot of political constituencies needing to be fed here if they're going to get behind that. And meanwhile, the public will not accept it if they aren't convinced that the money is, in fact, being returned to them. And I don't know how you fall for that anyway, but it obviously is the sales pitch that people are making. So those details are to be decided. It's not a fully baked idea inherently. Of course the idea is to get revenues and to redistribute. But it's possible that could be the way they go. I mean, remember, this is, if you look, as I mentioned, one of the top lines in the Green New Deal talking points was a massive investment in businesses and organizations that participate. Well, Katie barred the door. She's figured Washington out, and so now this is a serious effort.
Wow. And you said it before, even for folks unwilling to work. So that is grist for a whole other conversation. Chris, thanks very much for being with us today. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Greg.
Christopher C. Horner is a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.